The Tyson's Gift podcast was created to promote the normalization of metaphysical, spiritual topics, particularly the reality that we are all eternal souls having an earthly experience. Obviously, this will cover a wide berth of topics such as animal communication, mediumship, the paranormal, past life regression, energy healing, you name it. Former police officer and author Brandon Wainwright hopes to entertain his audience with fascinating discussions with experts as well as everyday folks who have metaphysical experiences and knowledge to share. The intention is to help make esoteric topics fun, relatable, and credible to audiences of all backgrounds. We hope you enjoy it. Now, your host of the Tyson's Gift podcast, Brandon Wainwright.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Tyson's Gift podcast on WLTK-DB. I'm your host, Brandon Wainwright. Of course, to start the show off, we always start it with our girl Pepper T, as she's sometimes called. If you've read my book, Tyson's Gift, How an 8-Pound Canine Became a Man's Greatest Spiritual Guide, then you know exactly why she's a part of the show. So, does she look comfortable? Are you glad to be here? No, she's not glad to be here. I'll go ahead and send her off. She has that weekly torture that I put her through. Okay, so I tell you, I really respect like television anchors where they have to look into the camera all the time during the show, because it's really hard to look into the lens when you're talking. It just doesn't feel natural. So pardon me if a lot of times I'm looking down at the screen because it just feels more natural. Anyways. Tonight we have an awesome show for you. It's my guest this week is my very close friend, since we've been best buds since we were 13. So 1986, somewhere in there. And we've been through an awful lot together, ups and downs, good, bad, ugly, funny, not so funny, you name it. His name is Wil Washburn, and he's going to be joining us tonight. He's a paranormal experiencer, so he's had a lot of quite a few remarkable experiences involving ghosts and even darker entities throughout his life, some of which we even experienced together while we were living in a haunted house out in Pleasant Hill, California. So he'll be on in just a moment. But I also wanted to share with you I had an experience this week with it's happened to me a number of times in the past, but I just thought this was particularly cool. So when I do my healings, a lot of times I try to tap in to any messages that spirit might have for the person I'm working on. And I just ask for, any messages for their highest good. And this particular week, my client Judy, who lives up in Pennsylvania, I've had some really great success with her, with healing her shoulders. And I've talked about her on the air in the past, but she, while I was working on her the other day, I channeled an image of a hope chest, like a dark colored hope chest, as well as the picture of like blankets, like yarn type of blankets, like crocheted knit blankets, and specifically the color orange in the blankets. And so when I was done, I asked her, when I called her after the session, if that made any sense to her. And it turned out she actually has these exact items in her house. I'll show a picture for the screen here. Okay, so there's the hope chest, if you can see it. For the podcast, for people listening just on audio, the hope chest is a dark colored wooden chest. And what I saw was it didn't appear quite so dark, but it was very close. And then also, I saw the orange, and this image, you can't see it that great on. It's a little bit better. Orange colored yarn material, and this blanket was in that hope chest. In addition to, there's also a blanket that looks like this that she had in her basement as well. What's really cool about it is the hope chest belonged to her mother, and the blankets were knitted by her or crocheted. I'm not sure which is technically the right term, but they were knitted. They were created by her grandmother. And just the night before that, she had had a dream about her mom, like a visitation type of dream, and she hadn't had one in a long, long time. So it really seemed like it was an acknowledgement, an affirmation that she had visited and wanted her daughter Judy to know how much she loved her. So I just wanted to share that because it's just it's really cool, first of all, but it's also, it just goes to show you that when a healer is doing a healing through distance, they really are connecting into the other person's energy field, and that's why you're able to tap into those messages. Actually, the same thing with Judy. The previous session that I had with her before that, I'm trying to remember. She had I saw a powder blue windbreaker jacket, and she said, "Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what that means." Well, the next day, her cousin, who she hadn't seen for a bit, came to visit, and she was wearing a powder blue jacket. So these are things that are common, and I've had it happen a number of times with other clients as well. So I just wanted to share that. I thought it was pretty cool. But on that note, I'm going to go ahead and bring my trusty friend in here, Wil Washburn. Hello.
Hey, Brandon, how you doing today?
Welcome to the show, brother.
Thank you, brother. Good to be here.
So just so that people know, where did we go to junior high school?
Canyon Middle School. There's a few folks that are probably listening that went there as well a little bit.
Yeah.
A few years after us.
All right, that's where we met in junior high. We didn't go to the same high school, but we stayed really close over the years. We've even lived together a couple different times.
Nerds of the world unite.
Well, how could I possibly go on with the show without telling my weekly dirty story? And I decided to wait until Wil was on the show. He hates it when I do this. He says it's bad for business, but I'm sorry. I'm going to be myself, and everybody knows that I've got a real toilety sense of humor. I'm not gonna stop with it. So I was out visiting California last week, and while I was there, he picked me up, and right now we're going to play it mild because we want to tell the story, but normally we constantly talk a lot of smack to each other, and Wil is the master of smackster. He's really good at talking shit, and so we're in the truck, and mind you, it's cold out there. It was in the low 50s out in California last week, in Northern California. So hey, I'm sure if you follow the show, you can guess exactly what I did. Yep, I passed a little Brandon sauce in the car.
You gassed me out.
Yep. And the thing about Wil, here's my first interview question. So how do you feel about flatulence anyway?
It's so rude to do to somebody else. It's
yeah,
forceful.
You don't even like it when you do it and it's just you in a room, right?
It's a nasal rape.
A nasal rape. That's pretty good. Actually, I've never heard that term before, not even from you. So that's good. And
yeah,
it makes what happened next even sweeter in my memory banks. So when I released the nasal rape to you, after you'd been talking smack, and how did you react?
It was the most intelligent thing you said all day. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Cam says Brandon sauce. Well, thank you. No, it's true.
And on to the show about metaphysical healing.
Okay, no. So just to be fair, I only do that to people that I really love and have it coming. So anyway, how did you react though? It shut you down pretty good, didn't it?
Yeah, I wasn't going to open my mouth if you paid me. That was,
Well, you didn't have a word to say after that. Honestly, he never is speechless. He always has a sharp comeback. He just looked at me with this look of like, you win. It was pure surrender, and I laughed. I haven't laughed that hard in a long time. It was wonderful. It was beautiful, brother. Thank you for that moment. It was a good stress reliever for me. Okay. And on
Thank you
that
for
note,
arranging the truck. Yeah.
now we'll get into the good stuff. Okay. We do have some good serious stuff to talk about, but okay. So um, you've had quite a few experiences in your life when it comes to paranormal visit, entities, ghosts, things like that, right?
Yeah, and you haven't always been along this path. For those of you who don't know Brandon, the metaphysical path that he's on is fairly new in his journey. I would say, within the past 5-6 years. But
Not even.
we've
Yeah,
lived
yeah, going
together
on 5 years. Yeah.
2 different places, maybe 3.
Well, two like where we actually like got our
Had
mail.
an address
Yeah.
together. But sometimes you kind of feel crazy, even mentioning some of the things that you might see or experience, and it's always nice to have somebody you trust validate you by experiencing the same craziness with you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So the most notable one for me with you was when we lived on Agnes Way in Pleasant Hill,
Mhm.
California,
For
right?
sure.
So, why don't you? Because in this particular situation, I was a roommate that I came in. You had 2 other roommates prior to me, and so what happened? Can you just kind of just tell a little bit about what
Sure.
happened
Well, we
where I
we
moved
had
in?
it wasn't exactly a party house, but it was definitely a crash pad. It was the 2 of us, another buddy of mine named Adam, and my cousin lived with us for a little while. She was a couple of years younger, but we had lived there a little over a year, and we would notice that every now and then you'd see the lights in one particular bedroom flick on and off. And the more we kind of started sharing stories, there seemed to be kind of a shadowy figure. There seemed to be 2 kind of competing phenomenons, if you will, where it almost sounded like there was somebody moving around in the kitchen, the way that somebody would move around in the kitchen if they were baking or doing dishes. Um, and we very much got a feeling of like an elderly woman. We used to call her grandma. We'd hear something in the kitchen and we'd go, "Oh, that's grandma in there." And every now and then you just see something in the corner of your eye that very much resembled an elderly woman. But there was a garage that had a storage area that was almost like an attic storage area, and it had an opening that looked down, that was uncovered, looked up or down depending on where you were standing. But I would tinker a lot in the garage playing with motorcycles, and there was especially when it got late and quiet. It was a pretty quiet neighborhood, but there was always a little bit of road noise. We were pretty close to some busy streets, and there was this really unsettling feeling that something was watching you with the intention of, like with a real angry intention. And it was one of those things where you kind of look over your shoulder a few times and you wonder, am I just imagining this? Or, is there actually something there? And there were a few times where I'd pull out the ladder and I'd stick my head up into that attic and was confident that I'm going to find a raccoon or an angry little animal that's just staring back at me, thinking that I've just invaded his territory. But that feeling was so certain that I think there were a couple times where I had lived there for a couple months when you moved in, and you came to stay there, and it was a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom place, 3-bedroom place.
Yeah.
And so my cousin, my buddy Adam, and I had a room, and we said, "Hey, well, we'll make a space for you in the garage, and we'll convert that into a bedroom." And
Knowing that there was something up in the
no,
attic.
no, no. But I warned you, and I said it was the first time that we talked about it, and I said, "Hey, well, happy to make a space for you. You were just moving back from LA and getting settled," and I said, "Welcome." But sometimes I feel really fucking weird about that space in the
I don't
attic.
remember you saying anything about that.
Oh, I remember walking out there with you and pointing to it and being like, "It might just be
No,
me."
you know what? I got to step in on that. You didn't say anything about that to me until years later, actually, when I brought up.
I'm pretty sure I brought it up.
No, you didn't. It was in conversation years later when I told you about the experiences I had in there, and then you told me about these things with you working, and in fact, when I moved in, I don't know if you remember this, but you set the room up to be like a bedroom.
Yeah.
You actually put a rug in there and a bed, and wanted me to feel
nice guy.
Yeah, it was actually really, really generous and nice the way you did that. But yeah, I would have remembered if you told me there was something up in the attic, because I would have probably told I'm not sleeping in there then. Go ahead.
But no, that I think there were a couple things that happened, but I think there was one night that we were there, and I can't remember. Were you there or not the night that Adam had the closet door experience?
No,
that was my cousin and I were
Go ahead
sitting.
and tell it.
My cousin and I were sitting in the living room, and you could see down the hallway. And my roommate Adam was sleeping in his bed, and he had his door open, and we were watching TV. He had either worked late or had to get up early, but he was already crashed out for the evening. And we saw the light flicker on and off about 3 times. And he had these closet sliding doors that are kind of the old style mirrors. And if you ever kind of push on those mirrors, they make an unnecessarily loud banging noise, da, 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 da. And the light flickered on and off about 3 or 4 times and caught our attention. And we looked down there, and you heard somebody like banging against those closet doors for what went on like 10 seconds. But 10 seconds of somebody banging on the doors sounds like a ridiculously long amount of time when you're sitting there thinking, why are you being so annoying? And it was enough where we could get up and we walked down the hallway, and as soon as we turned the corner to look into his room, he was opposite the room from the closet doors, and he was in his bed. This is a grown man, cornered against the wall with his sheets pulled up about 10 feet away from where the closet doors were at, and he was terrified. He was terrified that something had flicked the switches in his room and banged on the door. And he came out, and he came out of his room freaking out to join us in the living room. And as he walked out of his room, we turned the light switch off, and we got back to the living room, and he said an old school switch, like a little lever. And as we sat down on the couch, as soon as he sat down, click, the lights went back on in his room. And terrified wasn't the right word, but we were all completely unsettled. There was nothing. Yeah. There was nothing positive about it, and there was no curiosity about it. We were all sure that something else was doing that, and it was trying to let us know that we weren't welcome. But
it wasn't just getting your attention. It was hostile.
Yeah, and it was an older house. It was probably built post World War II. It was about 70, 80 years old at the time. Maybe not that old, but pretty darn close to it, and had a lot of owners that had been a rental for a long time. But we also had some good experiences in that house. I actually had a dog that died in that house, a dog that I had for a long time, and the dog got sick all of a sudden. And I was traveling a lot for work, and for whatever reason, I was alone for a couple days. And I left the house one day and noticed that the dog was really lethargic and laying next to its water bowl. Came home and did oh my gosh, as the dog was in the exact same position, and I realized that she hadn't moved for 8 hours. And so it was a pretty clear decision that we had to put her down. She was old. She was about 18. But I had somebody come to the house, and I held her while they put her down. And I had to put animals down before, but that was the first time that I had held one and really taken such a personal ownership of that act. And it was devastating to me. And put the dog down, and the vet who came to the house was nice enough to take her away. And I was just as sad as you could be. And my cousin, who I can't even remember what year this was. We must have been about 26, and she was 18.
It was 98. That would have been 98.
Yeah, we were about 25, 26. And my cousin was very keen to, we need to get another dog right away. And I was emphatic, no, I'm not going to go through this again. This is too emotionally hard. And literally the very next morning, I woke up and I heard something ticking at the front door, and I went out to open the door, and there was a stray puppy, like the runt of a litter, a little chocolate lab mixed dog that was just literally sitting on my porch. And I told my cousin, if you bring that dog in, you are in so much trouble. Somebody's going to be looking for that dog. We put a little box and some food and water outside, but I was not trying to take that dog in. I left for work and I came back and my cousin was sitting there with the dog. We took the dog in, and over the next couple of days, I would take the dog to dog parks on a really long leash. And the dog eventually found some little kids. And I said, hey, you like the dog? Ask your mom and dad if you can take it home. And finding that dog a home was a very kind of cathartic way of dealing with it. And nonetheless, it was a string of coincidences that completely uncommon.
So in that didn't Adam also see orbs? That's what I remember.
I think Adam was sleeping in the haunted room, for lack of a better word. It was always cold. And he was always seeing lights that weren't there. He was always calm. His room faced the backyard and the side of the house. But the way he would describe it was, it looked like there were headlights passing in the windows, very bright lights that would pass through his room.
I never heard of that. I don't remember that. Yeah, I remember him. Well, he was out shortly after I moved in, but that's crazy.
Yeah.
So I ended up taking that same room when Adam moved out eventually. Oh, I guess I should back up. The garage, the experience that I had in that garage was that when I would sleep at night, I felt like something was watching me from up in the attic. But at the time I wrote it off as, well, it's an attic space. There's no separation sheetrock wise or anything between me and this space. So of course I'm gonna, the little kid in me's coming out, and I would just ignore my intuition on it. And I mean, no big deal, right? But every night I was conscious that I felt like I was being watched. And then when Adam moved out and I moved into that room, I never had any of those orb experiences, and I never had the headlight experience. But the one that we experienced together, that was, I don't even think I was aware the place was haunted. I don't think you've ever mentioned any of that to me. Maybe because you weren't sure how I was going to take it.
Yeah.
But you didn't say anything, because that was the other thing. Well, it's always kind of been like that. We don't make very good roommates, but when I was, we were not getting along all that good, a lot of friction and such. And there was one particular night where we were kind of at each other's throats for whatever reason. And I was sitting in the room.
Yeah.
I was sitting in the room, and all of a sudden, now mind you, this room, the closet in this room, the one that had the doors that Will was referring to, that closet backed up to the closet that from Will's room across the hall. It was at the end of the house, and so across the hall.
I remember this. Yeah.
And I'm sitting there on my bed in the room, trying to pretend like I didn't live with Will, and then all of a sudden, I heard what sounded like a full-bodied person in his closet, not my closet, but in his closet, crawling around on that's what it sounded like. Somebody was crawling around on the shelf in this closet. And I was like, what the hell is going on? So I can't remember. I came out to the living room, and you were in there watching TV or whatever. And you were still mad at me about whatever we were arguing about before. And I said, what were you doing in your closet? And I remember you said, what? Like jerk dick? What are you talking about? And
probably.
And then I said, something was just crawling around in your closet. We have a ghost or something. I remember, and it was like being facetious. And then you went pale and you said, dude, this place is haunted. And that's when you told me all about all these other things that had happened. One of which, there was the Spawn character that was on the mantle, right? That flew across the
Yeah, a
room.
little action figure. Yeah.
That just flew across the room out of nowhere.
Yeah.
The other thing is that I probably have told you this story before, but my chore once I moved in was I cleaned the bathroom, and I was in the shower scrubbing the shower, and no one else was home. And I remember being in that shower, and I just felt like somebody was standing in the doorway of that shower, looking at me, watching me. I mean, it was a very keen sense that very creepy.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know that it was necessarily all that hostile as much as it was frustrated and
Hmm.
wanting to people to know it was there. It probably needed help. That's my view on it.
Yeah, I felt like there was I honestly, you know, sounds crazy sometimes, but we're in the right forum. And I felt like there was the ghost of an elderly woman who had a hard time letting go of that house, and I felt like she was very much a caretaker there. And then I felt like there was something very malevolent that made its home there and was somewhere between the back bedroom and the garage, kind of and always looking down. It's just one of those things where you can't explain how you feel it, but you know, every now and
There
then.
might be some truth to it because I definitely, there definitely was a combination of things. Yeah, it all didn't always feel malevolent, but
Yeah.
some of the time it didn't feel like the bathroom thing. I don't know. It didn't feel very.
She was mad that you weren't cleaning it well enough.
Yeah, it was creepy.
You probably weren't, but you know. But
I'm a better cleaner than you are. No. Anyway, so yeah, so that there was another incident that happened with you. Not when we lived together, but when I was living with Chris and Amy in Castro Valley in those apartments.
oh yeah, that was weird.
I remember coming out.
I hated that place. Yeah.
I mean, I never felt like there was anything negative there, but I remember coming out of the bathroom in the middle of the night. I got up to use the bathroom, and I came out and into the hallway, and it was completely dark. And I remember feeling like somebody was standing right in front of me.
Yeah.
I felt their energy. I felt like somebody was right there. But oddly enough, it didn't feel hostile at all. I didn't feel threatened by it at all. I remember distinctly having that register in my head. And oddly enough, Amy told me, I don't know if it was due to that situation or what, but she had told me that she saw orbs in her room. But what I found the most interesting, and it told me a lot about how tuned in you are, was not long after that you came over to visit, and you walked into my room was at the end of that hallway where this was, right? And I remember you standing in that hallway, and you said, and I never mentioned anything about this to you because it really was kind of a non-event for me at the time. But I remember you telling me there's a what did you say?
Benign.
A benign. That was it. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a benign spirit in this hallway, and
it's like somebody hanging out. You know,
like you just knew it. You knew 100%. You on a clear cognizant level, clear sentient level. You were aware. So that was definitely, to me, that was an affirmation that wouldn't quit. But on that note, I think we should we're already halfway through the show.
Jump in.
We should get into the juicy stuff. For those of you that, I don't know if you saw my show cheese for the week. That's my little stupid commercial I do every week. I talked about the Tophat Man. Now, Wil, as a young child, Wil had years of visitations from the Tophat Man, which there's various versions of that in I guess you could call it folklore, pop culture. There's people, but this is an entity or variations of this entity that people have seen. There's documented cases all over the place about it, and sometimes it's it's a guy like dressed in like Victorian costume, tuxedo, with the top hat, and has just kind of a non-threatening smile, just acknowledging the person. And then there's other reports where the person seems hostile. It's hard to say what it is exactly, but Wil had a particularly intense experience with the Tophat Man, or a variation of the Tophat Man hand that went on for years. And so that's the lead in. You go with it, brother.
Okay, we'll stop and ask questions anytime. But I was born in Kansas, 1973. We moved to California with my dad in the Army. Started in Seaside and Salinas in about 1976 when I was about 2.5, 3 years old. But we settled in this place called Acosta Plaza. It was a condominium complex. It was a migrant workers town back then. It was very poor. And Acosta Plaza was about the worst neighborhood that you could find in Salinas, but it was maybe a step up from it was a different scene. Seaside was very much a ghetto, and Acosta Plaza was a little bit nicer neighborhood, but there was a lot of violence there, a lot of gangs there. For anybody who's been in Northern California, there was a lot of conflict between Los Vagos and the Norteños back in the day. It was not a safe place. And I distinctly remember moving into that neighborhood thinking it was such a nicer place than we had lived before. But literally the day we moved in, Salinas PD came to the door, gave us this little business card for the crash unit, for the gang unit. Don't call 911, call this number directly, because we're not going to send officers down. We're going to send a gang unit down. It was a tough neighborhood, and one of my first memories there, probably being 5 years old, was going to the playground near the house and being told at knife point that the gangs control the playgrounds. So just to kind of set the scene, it was a rough neighborhood, and we were very poor. But when you're young and you're that age, it's just the world you live in, and you kind of accept things as the way they are. My mother had been raised very Catholic, and my father was raised very Lutheran. But as you move around a lot in the military,
hey, let me interrupt you real quick. Cheryl Bales says, "I have been tormented by what I call the shadow man and other entities." So that sounds similar, huh?
Yeah, we'll see. Because there are a couple of variations on this that I ended up learning about once this kind of thing started and happened to me in the late 70s. And you kind of think you're crazy or insane, but when the internet came out, it was the first time that I really had some conscious validation that, holy crap, this is I know I'm not insane, but there's some validation that comes with other people have seen this thing too. But my parents had come from different religious backgrounds, and they found kind of a home at this place, this Baptist church that was very, very unorthodox. But we had started going there, and for whatever reason, I've heard this several times. I traveled a lot. I've lived in some strange places myself, and every now and then I'll find myself in a church, and a stranger will come up to me and ask me to teach, to talk, usually saying the words, "You have the gift of the priesthood," in a very kind of creepy, kind of weird way. At 5 years old, we walked into this church, and the pastor walked right up to my parents and said, "There's something special about this kid. He has the gift of the priesthood." And my parents immediately put me on this priesthood track where it was intensive studying. I learned how to read through the church. It was 3-4 days a week of church after school, all day Sunday. I mean, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Sundays. I was immersed in the church while we lived in this neighborhood where it pretty much just wasn't safe to go outside. But I was proud to be part of that. The church itself, it was a Baptist church, but I did a lot of work with the elders in the church, and would do a lot of specific teachings. And they were very convinced that even though they weren't Catholic, that the evils of man could be attributed in almost every case to demonic possession. So there were moments where, I was 6, and I remember I sat in the background on this exorcism that they performed on one of the church members who, he had been caught with his stash of Playboys by his wife, and in a very conservative church, instead of kind of chalking that up to a man's sexual fascination with a woman's body, that must be demons. So we must perform an exorcism. And years later, I would think that guy was just trying to get away with it, didn't want to own it in front of his wife. But the church would come in and the elders would come in and they would do an exorcism. And I can remember being about 6 years old. And this was kind of normal in the world that I was growing up in. I was the only kid there. But and as insane as it sounds to me now to say it, you're just a kid. This is just the way you're kind of growing up. But I remember this very clearly, and I remember the sitting in on 3 different exorcisms for things that were very kind of mundane, like the guy with the Playboys, or there was a guy who was an auto mechanic, and it actually turned out that he had a really bad temper, and actually turned out that he was a pedophile, which we found out later. But anything that you did wrong, the church immediately put a finger on it and said that's got to be demons. It's got to be demons. It was cult-like, probably pretty accurate way of saying it. But while I was in this house and we were going to this church, things escalated very quickly and got very negative in the home. I was just a little kid, but I can remember the way things escalated when my parents were I don't remember them being angry before the house, but when we were in there, it went from temper tantrums to anger to broken windows. And spending a lot of time, people would be in the house, but you would be alone in the house. Everybody became almost instantly disengaged from each other. My dad always wanted to be alone, and he was so annoyed at any attempt you made to speak to him. And my mom was always struggling with a temper. And my mom and I, years later, apart from this house, I think we probably had one argument as I was growing up. Literally, I wasn't a temperamental person. She wasn't a temperamental person. But when we lived in that house, I can remember the days where she was ripping the cabinets off the kitchen cabinet doors, ripping every single one of them off the hinges and breaking every single plate, screaming at the top of her lungs. I was scared. I was scared of my parents. And I was having nightmares, and my sister, she's 3 years older than I am, she was having nightmares, but we were literally scared to wake up our parents because we were scared that they were going to be angry at us and maybe even hurt us if we woke them up. So we had been in there about 6 months, and things had gotten sketchy in the house, just amongst the personalities. And my parents' solution to this was, let's get rid of the TV, let's get rid of the records, let's get rid of the books, let's get rid of anything and everything that didn't originate from the church. And I can distinctly remember, I was such a little kid, and it's not like I had like a record collection, but I distinctly remember thinking as they were breaking the Elvis Presley "You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog" record, like, how is this the devil? How is this the negative thing that we're trying to get out? But what I wouldn't realize until years later is they were really struggling with their own nightmares and the things that were scaring me about them with their temper had them on like a level 10 in fear. They were scared of what was going on in the house and couldn't explain it. So the way they dealt with it was they just decided they were going to get rid of anything and everything that didn't come with the church. So I was allowed to go to like the Christian bookstore, and we could buy music or books from there. And I distinctly remember, it's like 1979. I'm like 5.5, 6 years old. they get a comic book called The Rapture. Are you familiar with The Rapture?
No. Mm-mm.
So it's
Not
a
in
fairly new concept.
the comic book, you mean?
No, it just the concept of the rapture. Like it's kind of misunderstood, and from an evangelical, from a Christian standpoint, there's a lot of disagreement about whether or not it actually is canon. There's very few references in the Bible, but if you follow this kind of evangelical religious fundamentalism, the rapture is an event that's loosely referred to in the book of Revelations, where it says there's, and I'm not going to go too deep on it, but did a lot of Bible study as a kid. So everybody talks about, God's going to come back someday, the Messiah is going to come back, and he's going to save everybody. But if you look really closely at Revelations, what it says is he's going to save 12,000 members of each of the 12 tribes of Israel. He's going to save 144,000 people, which is a pretty insignificant number. The rest of us are going to suffer what's called the tribulation. So the rapture is this moment where Jesus, God, whatever you believe, comes down and he saves the believers who have already died. They go up, they ascend to heaven with him, and he saves only 144,000 people who are from the 12 tribes of Israel. Everybody else suffers the rapture in the tribulation. And the tribulation is a period, there's some disagreement. It's either 3.5 or 7.5 years, but it's the most incomprehensibly dark time of humanity. There's unbelievable famine and murder and death and human sacrifice and cannibalism. It's going to be the worst time in human history. And if you can survive this period without ever turning away from God, then he's going to come back and he's going to save everybody. And if you don't believe me, read it, look it up, read your books. But essentially,
let me interject some. Cheryl Bales says, seems like these experiences come with pain in the family. My last experience was with a major back surgery in 2021. I told the shadow man to leave.
Yeah. So. Well, for me, there was a consciousness that my immersion at such a young age in the church was making me a little bit of a target. I was very conscious of this even at 6 years old. But if you believe in the rapture and you believe in the tribulation, it basically says that there's going to be no human light. There's going to be no good in the world. The only hope, the only light that will exist, period, will be God. And if you can make it through the tribulation and acknowledge that the only good thing in the world is your faith in God, then you get saved. But you have to go through this horrific human destructive period. This was a fucking comic book that they gave to a 6-year-old kid, and it was all about like cannibalism and families turning on families and people eating each other.
What could be a more powerful time to make a kid scared than when they're
dude.
Fear is a powerful motivator. That's
But as I sat reading this comic book one night, it scared the shit out of me. I couldn't put it down. I couldn't finish my dinner, and I was going to be punished. So I was sent to bed early for not finishing my dinner quickly. And there's some things that you remember around some events, but I can remember walking by the clock and looking at it at 6:15 and thinking like, unbelievable, I have to go to bed at 6:15 because I didn't eat fast enough. So I go upstairs and I'm in my bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed. And I'm looking at, I've got a doorway in front of me that looks down a long hallway into a living room. And the hallway light is on. It's bright enough to light my room without turning the light on. And I kind of take my shoes off. And I started to hear a whispering that was clear. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but it was stopped what I was doing, just sitting there in my clothes, taking my shoes off. And then it was 2 voices, and then it was 4 voices, and then it was 20 voices. And I'm looking down the hallway, and I can tell it's coming from the room at the opposite end of the hallway, this living room that's just dark. And these things felt like they took forever, but it really was a small amount of time, and the whispers all of a sudden became talking, which kind of became growling, and then it became this yelling and this screaming, and there was this massive noise that sounded like hundreds of people engaged in like combat violence, and I was paralyzed, just motionless, kind of staring at this dark doorway. And if you've ever seen like the way shadows kind of dance on water, like the ocean, there was this movement that seemed to be happening on the other end, and the volume was the only word I can use was saturating. I cannot describe the sound. It was so penetrating. And what I could see on the other side was these shadows started to take shape, and I could see people in there, but they were like gray. They were like decomposed flesh. They were dead people, and they were packed into this room like floor to ceiling. Like if you put a bunch of insects in a jar and you looked at it from the side, this was like floor to ceiling people, and they were just like they were frantic. They were frantic to get out of the room. And it's like when I could see them and I saw them and they saw me, it was like this consciously, like there was this ravenous intent where they were coming to get me. But in the mess of bodies that they were, anytime one of them would make reach a hand out and crawl 1 foot forward, the mass of people behind would consume them, crush them, just destroy them. So it was like this wave of bodies that was slowly moving towards me, but they were like consuming each other as they got closer.
So let me ask you this: Do you think this imagery that you were seeing was literal, or do you think it was there to scare the daylights out of you?
I think it was somewhat symbolic of the strength and the fury that was behind one entity. And I can remember in my mind, I'm crying, but I can't cry. I'm trying to scream, but I can't even move. I can barely even breathe. I can just feel this sound coming through me, but there was this consciousness that, like, because of my relationship with the church, because I'm the young priest boy, in the church prodigy, whatever program, I was a beautiful target. I was a beautiful trophy of some sort. I was very conscious of who I was and why they were here. And it took them what seemed like forever to get down that hallway in my paralysis. And as they got to the door of my room, just 3 feet away from me, there was this stall where they kind of built up and took up all the space around the door. And I flew back and pulled the sheet up over my head. And as soon as I did, they kind of flooded into the room, and I could feel people just immediately lunge under my bed, and more people came in until like this massive bodies was pushing the bed literally higher and higher until I was pressed against the ceiling with the bed at my back. And I screamed. I mean, I was screaming in terror at the top of my lungs. And in one blink, they were gone. And I could see my mom rushing down the hallway. And she's screaming, "It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare." And I was laying there in the bed, just like convulsing in fear, and was very conscious. It's not a nightmare. I haven't even fallen asleep. And I remember very distinctly looking at the clock, and it was 6:25. I had walked out of the other room 10 minutes earlier. And my mom refused to believe that I had been asleep, but I knew, like, either I'm absolutely crazy or this was absolutely not a nightmare.
Well, yeah, it doesn't sound like it was a nightmare. Hey, I want to just share a couple messages that have come through. This is also from Cheryl. Brandon, I would love to talk to you about some of my experiences. Some are pretty trippy. Can I reach you through Facebook? I think it's through Facebook Messenger. Actually, the easiest way to reach me, you could do that, or you can get me through the website, tysonsgift.com or tysonsgifthealing.com, Cheryl. But yeah, I'd love to talk to you about it. And Jamie, she also says she was pulled off her bed, which I fully believe. And then Jamie Lynn Keller says, sorry I'm late. Good evening, gentlemen. Oh, you missed all the fart jokes, Jamie Lynn. Okay, I don't want to divert you. Go ahead.
You just killed the moment there, but
hey, some of us were being smothered by the darkness, brother. Come on. Okay,
Well, I'll tell you, so my mom stayed there, and she kind of comforted me for a little while until she got tired, and it was time for her to go to bed. But I was not going to sleep. And I remember that she goes to bed, my dad goes to bed, my sister falls asleep, and the house got really, really quiet. And if you've ever lived in a ghetto ass neighborhood, it's never quiet. Never quiet. It got silent where you could hear the air. And in a very dramatic entrance, like the light of the hallway went very dark, and a man appeared who was standing in the doorway, and I did not see him walk into the doorway, but all of a sudden he was in the doorway, and his shoulder, dude, he was a giant. His shoulders were so wide that he took up the entire width of the doorway, and he was so tall that he had to turn his head to the side because the top of the door frame pushed against the top of his head. He had a Western style tuxedo where it was very much kind of cut high on the ribs, but it had tails, all black. He had I could see there was a lot of shadows on his face, but I could see clearly that there was a skull of a face there. But the shadow from this short Western style top hat covered the rest of his face. And he laughed in a really sinister laugh. And that was the first night that I saw the Tophat Man for what would be the next 3 years. Any night that I was sleeping alone, he came back every single night that I was sleeping alone from 3 years on.
Whole years.
Yeah.
And what can you describe? What his voice sounded like? What the laughter sounded like?
His jaw never moved, as if it was, I could hear him, but he wasn't speaking. I was conscious that it might be in my head. And I was, even as a 6-year-old, I immediately knew, if you start talking about this, people are going to lock you up and think you're crazy. But he had a very deep voice that was, for all intensive, like, it's hard to articulate, but it was penetrating. It was the kind of voice that was so intimidating that you don't have to acknowledge your vulnerability. You know that you're the victim in this moment, and all the strength that you could muster would be nothing but, false fronts and purely just a fake sense of confidence. It was terrifying. But
Cheryl says, in your head and taunting. She says, "I get it." So
it was taunting, but it was there were for a very long time. It was it would play to the fears that I experienced every day. And it wasn't
sounds like
long.
it sounds like it was taking advantage
It was.
of your innocence, your vulnerability, the naturals.
I was a little kid, and I can remember getting, like, I was a very gregarious. I'm a super outspoken person. I almost can't shut up most of the time. Shout out to the people who tell me I interrupt too much. But if you look at my report cards from those years, literally comments that Wil is the shyest person that has ever existed. Wil is the quietest person in the world. It invaded every corner of my life. I know we're running short on time, and if the that is a great introduction to when this came in. But it did not come in without drama. It did not come in without purpose. And
no, it needed to make you its victim. It needed to put you in a state of fear, a state of manipulation. It was capitalizing on all your fears, all the sensational ideas that movies and ghost stories and everything else, especially for a little kid, might have.
Keep in mind, bro, we had gotten rid of the TV. We had gotten rid of comic books. We had gotten rid of anything and everything.
But you're still very much aware of those types of stories.
But that is a key point, that there were things that were presented to me through this asshole that I was conscious at the time. This cannot be coming from inside my head. Yeah. Like, I have no, like, I can imagine some very dark things now, and it's as with the exposure that we have as adults in today's day and age. But when you're 6 years old and you grow up in a bubble that is created by the church, and your free time is the church, I was very conscious. There is no way this is in my imagination. But if I share it with people, they're going to think I'm insane. And I think part of the control, part of the fear came from that you can't tell anybody about this.
Sure. Yeah, so you were isolated.
Oh, it's so isolating. It's so isolating.
Hey, bro, let me stop you because there is another hard break coming up at 8:00.
There isn't the hard break coming up. We got a message from Todd just the same.
Well, there's another show that starts at the top of the hour, but I want to.
No, they canceled that, but that's okay.
No, they didn't.
Did they? He did. He sent a message.
Oh, he did. Let me
check your comments. That's okay.
Good. Top of the hour. The next show just canceled. Oh. Well, in that case, we're gonna just
anyway. Let's save it for
going with this. Let's see.
What do you think it was?
I got enough men here for those kind of jokes. I'm here to hear the experiences. My goodness, she says. She doesn't want to be bothered with those fart jokes. And then Jamie says, I'll certainly have to watch the show entirely. I can't imagine. My dreams are so frequent but never repeated and so very wacky. They make no sense. Cheryl says that we should do a part 2, and that I know the devil feeds on fear. So what do you want to do, Wil? Let's
do a part 2. There's I have a great story on what happened for the next 3 years and how this.
Do you want to do a part 2, or do you want to continue going tonight?
Let's do part 2. This is too long already.
I think the audience might beg to differ, but yeah, I know you've got.
Well, I would love to ask you, and I would love to get some comments from people, because, when you go through this kind of thing, and especially as a kid, and especially before the internet, I'm sure pretty much everybody listening here grew up without the internet to some degree or the other. But, we've all heard now stories, or most of us have heard stories of the Hat Man, but nobody heard those stories before 2002, 2005, and now there's this proliferation, and there's
sure they did, but not to the same extent.
Yeah, there's all this proliferation about what it is, and speculation about what it what its intention is. And I would love to get your opinion on somewhere between ghost and demon and entity. And
Well,
I
let
even
me
heard
let
somebody
me
say they
ask you
think it's
this:
like
Are you do you want to? Because I think I want this. All this. Okay, yeah. Cheryl's saying, "Please continue." Jamie's saying, "Good night, y'all. I want this to continue, but I want to hear the beginning of all this first." Okay, so maybe I guess you got your wish. We'll do as part two. I do you. I mean, my opinion is, I know the whole story, but I'm going to let Will tell his whole story on the next episode. But I think I'm one of those that didn't pretend to know any of it. I don't even pretend to know all the metaphysical stuff that I do, all the energy healing, the channeling and stuff like that.
do you think it's demonic,
I don't
or do
even
you think
begin to
it's
say
otherworldly?
that I know all the ins and outs of all that either. But because I think there's lots that we just can't know yet. But yeah, demonic. I don't know. My opinion is that it's certainly it's coming from a place of negative intent, whether it's demonic or not.
Yeah.
I don't know. And the thing is, you hear about. I kind of feel like this is premature because we haven't heard your full story yet. In fact, why don't we wait on it? Why don't we wait till the second?
Okay,
So that way
let's do it.
we can kind of get into noodling on what we think that the origin is and all that sort of thing. But Cheryl also, she says, my dad's house. The entity visit us each separately. So the shadow man terrorized her whole household. So
He did with mine too, but
okay,
nobody talked about it. We
it's
all were isolated.
yeah, because you're all thinking that you're nuts, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and in
Yep.
today's world, I think people in today's world are much more keenly aware of the paranormal, and I don't think they think of it as so. It's not taboo like it once was. It's not a taboo subject to talk
It
about.
was so taboo back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, think about how taboo extraterrestrials were back in the day. I mean, just
Right.
the
You had to be
concept
an
that
idiot
aliens
to believe
actually
it. Yeah.
existed back when we were kids was like, yeah,
You have
maybe.
to be crazy.
Yeah, but most, I would say, at least half the people, probably more than half the people, didn't think that they really exist. In today's world, I would say that's probably up to 80 to 90% people think that
Yeah, I'd probably
do
agree with
exist,
that. Yeah.
along with the paranormal. And I know that I don't think I know that the paranormal exists. I know that that there's life after death. And let me so I'll go ahead and you can stay on with me, Will, but I'm going to just go ahead and close it out here.
Thank you guys for having me. Thank you, friend.
Cheryl says that she will email me, which is great, Cheryl. Good job. I'm looking forward to that. Um, as far as all this stuff is concerned, for people that are tuning in and this is creeping them out or whatever, what I would, the whole point of this show is to illustrate that there's more.
There's more.
Particularly that there's life after death. That's the thing that I really want people to walk away from each show with, and gain peace from that. And while this may be kind of a dark illustration that there's more, it still does illustrate that there's more. And what I will say is that the light is way more powerful than the dark. And I think that it's a keen illustration of that. The fact that this thing, whatever it is, had to pick on a 5-year-old kid.
Yeah.
Okay. If that same thing came to Will today, Will would know how to light it up and tell it to beat it. Not that there aren't dark influences around us. It's true. I mean, there's dark and there's light, but the light is always more powerful. So those of you that are listening to this and creeped out by it, or are right now feeling helpless, don't feel helpless. You have the power to overcome any of this, and all you got to do is call in the light to protect you. I've had it happen to me, and thing wasn't happy. It was pissed off. I've never actually told this story. Maybe I'll have to tell that next
Next week.
Yeah, I'll tell it in the next episode. But boy, did it beat it when I brought the light in. It didn't have any answers for that. So this is the type of thing where the darkness wants you to believe that you're helpless. The darkness wants to have control over you, just like a bully does. And the reality is that when you call it on it, when you call a bully, and you call its bluff, generally speaking, a bully will back down. In the darkness, I'm not saying that there aren't powerful dark entities, and I'm not trying to pick a fight here, but what I will say is when you stand up to a bully, the bully will generally back down. Okay, so I'll leave that. What I also want to say is, of course, if you're interested in Tyson's Gift, I got to plug my book. I got to plug it. Will is, by the way, I will say this. Will is not selling anything. He's not selling a book. He's not trying to get on TV. He's just coming on.
First time I've ever told this story.
Well, you've told me
other than to friends.
That's the other thing is I will say this, that Will, I've been hearing the same story since we were 13. It's never deviated. It's the same story. This is a very authentic story for you skeptics.
My life.
This is very, very real. But on that note, I will plug Tyson's Gift.
Makes a great Christmas gift.
Yeah, it makes a great
story of a man and his
great Christmas.
And how he brought him spiritual.
Trying to think. I don't think there's any fart jokes in it, although there might be. I can't think off the top of my head. But it's good. It's a good, clean, uplifting story. If you're interested in it, tysonsgift.com. If you're interested in my healing offerings, tysonsgifthealing.com. So I hope you'll check it out. Will,
see you next time.
We're gonna have to set a date for the next show, but just real quick looking at my calendar here for people that might want to. Actually, you guys need to be tuning in every week. I shouldn't be doing this, but let's see. Guess it'll have to be in February. We'll have to wait until February. No.
Well,
sorry.
Way to keep him hanging.
Yeah. It'll be February, but I guarantee you'll enjoy it when you tune in, and we'll have him back. So
thanks for having me, Brandon.
Will, thank you for coming. Thanks for making the time, and I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too, brother.
Okay. All right. For those of you that are tuned in, thanks again for tuning in to the Tyson's Gift podcast on WLTK-DB. We won't be on next week because the station's shutting down for the week for Christmas, but I hope everybody has a very Merry Christmas or any other happy holiday that you celebrate. End of another year, and things are crazy here right now. Things are crazy in our country, but the light is ultimately in control, and we are on the upswing, whether it feels like that right now or not. So I wish the best for everybody, and I hope you have a great night, great holidays.